I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
We all have those hidden bruises in us that tend to get pressed.
That's New York Times bestselling author Max Lucado, once dubbed America's pastor by Christianity Today.
I wonder how much of our own message comes out of our own wounds.
In addition to exploring the biography of Max's own message, we'll also discuss why he chose to break his own rule about keeping silence about politics and his newest book entitled Tame Your Thoughts.
Practice picky thinking. That's my favorite phrase. And my subtext is just because you have a thought, you don't have to think it.
All coming right up. Hello friends, Lee C. Camp here. Last week in Salt Lake City, I met a station manager from a small town who's given her life to serving her community through public radio. Now, because of massive funding cuts, station managers like her are wondering if they may have to turn off the mic for good. Larger stations are slashing budgets too, cutting the very programming that keeps us connected and often inspired. As a podcast listener, you may or may not know that No Small Endeavor is aired weekly on roughly 100 stations throughout the country. And given the current financial crisis for public radio, we at No Small Endeavor want to help. We're extending the time public radio stations can air our show for free, and we are asking you to join us. For as little as $5 a month, you can help keep No Small Endeavor on the air from Anchorage, Alaska to Jacksonville, Florida. Consider making it more, because by doing so, you're helping spread a bit more beauty, truth, and goodness to communities nationwide. Go to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSE Plus today. Help keep the airwaves alive with NSE. So the last 2 weeks have been a blur. A conference in Dallas, a few days back in Nashville, out in Utah, where I got a day to myself to hike in the Wasatch Mountains, then a conference in Salt Lake City, then back to Nashville to tape 5 hours of interviews in the next 2 days. And you know what I've taken with me on those travels packed in my bags? My cachava. I kid you not. I love my cachava. In the midst of all that craziness, it kept me well nourished, mind and body. And I really do like it so much that I look forward to it. Find myself telling myself, oh wait, you can have your cachava in about an hour. As you've heard me say before, a serving has 25 grams of 100% plant-based protein, plus 6 grams of fiber, and with every 2 scoops of cachava, you get 85 plus superfoods, nutrients, and plant-based ingredients. No artificial flavors, colors, or sweeteners, non-GMO, no soy, no animal products, no gluten, and no preservatives. So, rethink your definition of fast food. And they just launched a new flavor, strawberry, with real freeze-dried strawberry. You've never tasted strawberry like this. Go to kachava.com and use code NSE for 15% off your next order. That's Kachava, KACHAVA.com, code NSE for 15% off. I can sometimes find it a challenge to get to sleep. I need to make sure to do my bedtime reading, practice a bit of gratitude for the gifts of the day, and then I intentionally relax the muscles in my face. And then it's so exquisitely pleasurable to have our set of Bowl and Branch's signature sheets. They're made free from toxins with the finest 100% organic cotton. They come with a 30-night worry-free guarantee and are ethically crafted by expert artisans that earn fair wages. I loved the way they felt when I pulled them out of the package, and I love the way they feel as I drift off to sleep. So why tarry? Feel the difference an extraordinary night's sleep can make with Bowl and Branch. Get 15% off plus free shipping on your first set of sheets at bowlandbranch.com/NSE. That's Bowl and Branch, BOLLAND, branch.com/NSE to save 15% and unlock free shipping. Exclusions apply. I'm Lee C. Camp. This is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life. Tell me how you came to believe that. I think it was a conversation with New York Times op-ed columnist David Brooks where I heard that line. David suggested to me that instead of arguing with someone about what they believe, he's taken to asking this instead. Tell me how you came to believe that. That is, ask about the story behind the belief, the narrative behind the conviction. Then, whether you agree or not with the conviction, you have, at a minimum, gotten a glimpse into the human being in front of you. I've decided to call this the autobiography of belief. Tell me stories about who you are. Let us see how your experiences have led you to care about the things you care about, how your experiences have led you to the things you call your convictions. It's a privilege to see the beauty of another human being in this way. Through the years, we've been privileged to sit down with a number of prominent guests for such conversations, and today is one of those episodes with pastor and New York Times bestselling author Max Lucado, once dubbed America's pastor by Christianity Today and the best preacher in America by Reader's Digest. Max has more than 150 million products in print, has penned more than 40 works of adult nonfiction. I wanted to know from Max what in your childhood experience in small town West Texas has formed you to be the person you are still today. Why is there this deep, persistent insistence on grace, forgiveness, acceptance? Why break your own rule about not talking about politics in a way that stirred up a great deal of social pain? Plus, we discuss Max's newest book, Tame Your Thoughts. Here's our conversation with Max Lucado. Welcome, Max.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. You grew up in a small town in West Texas?
I did. Yeah. My father was an oil field worker. He was one of 9 kids, and he was raised in West Texas. And all his brothers were able to get jobs with the Santa Fe Railroad and ended up in California. But Dad was colorblind, and they wouldn't hire him. And so he was able to get on with Exxon. He was an oil field worker, literally digging ditches to lay pipe. And that's how he started. And that ended up keeping us in West Texas for all of his life.
When you think back about your time in West Texas, what kind of stands out to you as things that you took with you for good?
Yeah. West Texas is not famous for being geographically beautiful, right? And so oftentimes people will say, it's not that pretty, but the people are great. That's the phrase you hear over and over and over again. And that's really true. There is a sense of community, I think, among the West Texans. The people in our little town were all blue collar. And we youngsters, teenagers, didn't have a lot. We had plenty, but if we had anything extra, we had to earn it ourselves. So most of us ended up working in the oil fields during the summers and at Christmas break. I hated it at the time, but looking back, it taught me to, get myself out of bed early and try to do something constructive. What
about your mother? What are things that stand out to you still about your mother's influence on you?
Great question. My mom was a nurse. Both my parents were raised during the Depression. My dad was 40. I shouldn't say they were raised during the Depression. They were born in 1914, 1916, but they got married during the Depression. And that really shaped our lives because they were extremely frugal with everything. And when you ask about my mom, that's what I think of. I can actually remember going with her to the alley behind the grocery store where they had discarded vegetables like tomatoes and lettuce because they deemed them unworthy to put out in the produce section. And she would search through them and see if there wasn't anything good that she could take home for free. I thought everyone did that, but she was extremely frugal. She'd grown up in a very, very poor home. She battled depression a lot during her life. We didn't know what to call it, but now I do. And Dad, on the other hand, was quite jovial, easygoing. Mom had pretty wild mood swings, and so we had to learn to navigate that. And they provided for us so well. She worked as a nurse so that all 4 kids, I'm the youngest of 4, could go to college. So I'm forever grateful for her willingness to work and provide.
Yeah. How do you think those mood swings or her own navigating depression, how do you suspect that impacted you as a child?
To this day, if my wife takes on a particular tone and I'm 70 years old to this day, but if my wife says, Max, you forgot to pick up your clothes, that hits a nerve that is raw even all these years later because my mom was so fastidious. And if we left anything lying around out of place, we could get it, pretty severely. And so I learned to walk on eggshells around her, and we could all sense when she came home in a particular mood, or she would let us know. She would come home and unleash a bit on us. And so learning to walk around that, I wish so much that I had known to encourage her to go to get some help, some medicinal help, or some therapeutic help. But that's just something you didn't do back in her day, especially. And so she lived with it, and we learned to live with her.
Yeah.
But I want to be clear, I love her.
Oh, sure.
Of course,
yeah. When did you begin to have different language, like the language of depression, to frame that childhood experience?
Great point. Great question. And for me, that happened when my wife passed through a season of depression. After I finished seminary, I moved to South America, where we lived for most of the 1980s. That's when I began writing books. And I didn't realize that the books were doing as well. I was a bit removed from it, moved back to the States in 1988, and was able to get a position at a church where in San Antonio, Texas, as the senior pastor. But I started getting all these speaking invitations. And so I thought, well, this is great. I'll go everywhere they ask me to go. It was a lot of fun for me, but it wasn't fun for my wife, who at that time we had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And off I would go on a Thursday and get back on Saturday night and then get up early and preach on Sunday. And I had no clue that she was spiraling. And she was seriously spiraling. And I came in one time, I was about 33 at the time. I came home from a trip, and she was lying on the floor in a fetal position. And she was just undone. She had exhausted. Her tank was beyond empty. I did not know what to do. And by God's great provision, our next door neighbor was a psychiatrist.
Huh.
And I went over and talked to him, and he said, well, I think we can help. And that led then to some good sessions and some learning lessons and some medicinal support. And so that's when I began to understand the language of clinical depression. I'm not a therapist, but I'm fascinated by the whole subject. But I try to be careful and not act like I understand it to the degree that people might assume. But I do think it's a challenging and major issue in our world today. And I came firsthand with it with my mom. I did not know what was happening with her. But with my wife, we've watched that. And she's done great, by the way, within a matter of months. Her husband was off the road, staying home where he should be. I learned a huge lesson. And she kind of got balanced again.
What would you say out of that experience in seeing that both with your mother and with your wife? What would be like your, top 3 or 5 considerations for cultivation of good mental health?
I do think, in fact, the book we're going to discuss here in just a moment is called Tame Your Thoughts, and it has to do with this whole world of thought management. And I am a pastor, and I've realized that that's really what I'm helping people do. I'm urging them to be careful how they think and to manage their thoughts in a way that doesn't lead to negative, toxic, quicksand seasons of life, and learning to recognize that. So I would say, first of all, acknowledge that much of mental health is managing thoughts. And then I would say, number 2, try to take inventory of your own thoughts. Is there a certain area where you find yourself susceptible to a particular type of thought? For some, it might be greed. For some, it might be insecurity. There is, for all of us, a tendency to go a certain direction, and oftentimes this happens when we're tired and we're not paying attention. So I would challenge that person first to, I call it practice picky thinking, but then also identify that particular area where you find yourself. I mentioned kind of the little secret wound I have from my mom, and it can be triggered. And now I know why it bugs me when I hear that particular tone. And okay, I just got pressed. We all have those hidden bruises in us that tend to get pressed. And so once you've taken inventory of your thoughts, then I think the third thing is to develop a response system for when those thoughts begin to surface. If a person is dealing often with, I've got to have more, and it's a sense of greed, Probably that comes from an insecurity somewhere back in our lives that says, unless I have more, I'm not valuable. Try to identify where that comes from and develop some type of approach for managing those thoughts.
What else were you like as a boy, a young man?
I always loved books. Always did. Yeah, which is curious because I certainly wasn't raised in an academic or scholarly family, but I loved books.
What's some of your earliest memories of book reading?
Hanging out in a library,
Yeah.
Elementary school library, the middle school library, the public library in our little West Texas town. And my parents were so kind, and they would drop me off at the public library in the summer and let me just stay in there. And I would literally read. I loved biographies.
Huh.
And I must have read 30 or 40 books every summer.
What else were you like? You loved books, loved reading. What else were you like?
By the time I was 15, that's when I started drinking. And that's when life began to come unraveled for me. I was raised in a church-going home, and I was raised in a teetotaler home. My dad did not allow any alcohol into the house because he was surrounded by siblings, many of whom were alcoholics. So he just said there'll be no drinking in our house. My brother battled alcoholism his entire life, except for his final 2 years. You would have loved my brother. Everybody did. He was just so easygoing and likable and lovable. But boy, that bottle just took him under. And so by the time I was about 15, he already knew the ways of securing the beer, and we keep working around the system, my dad not knowing about it. And so he tutored me. He mentored me. And I do not know if that alcoholism gene is in my system. But what I can recall with very vivid detail is the sensation I felt the first time I drank a beer. My buddies would say, well, I don't think I like that beer very much. And I would say, man, I don't know. It does something for me. And so I think it must be something. I must be susceptible to it. So by the time I was 15 years old, I was building my calendar around our parties and getting drunk. And my dad caught me at the age of 15. And this is really important. I loved my dad. I idolized him. And when I saw he came in, I was throwing up in the bathroom in the middle of the night. And I told him I got sick on Mexican food, and he knew better. And the next morning, he was so upset with me. That's when I first, I think, Lee, started dealing with shame. I like that expression that shame is self-hatred at my expense, S-H-A-M-E, because I just began to hate myself. And the spiral of hating yourself and then treating it with more alcohol is really ironic. So I think I was a pretty decent guy otherwise. I played sports, and I made A's and B's. I ran for student council and got elected. So on one hand, I was really a pretty good kid, but I had this other part of my life, and I realized it's pretty easy to lead a dual life if you're sharp. And my brother and I figured it out, and so that was a tough season during those days.
I mean, the number of books you've published is quite incredible. 46, 7.
40, mid-40s.
Mid-40s, yeah.
It's easy if you just focus on quantity and don't worry about quality.
What is your rhythm of writing? What do your writing habits look like?
I love talking about writing, by the way. So tell me if I go in too much detail on this. But I'm just fascinated by writing. And in high school and college, the subject that I loved was English, especially when English was more creative writing and literature than grammar. I could suffer through grammar, but I loved creative writing. And so when I was in seminary, that's when I realized I like writing these papers. Everybody else is complaining, but give me an assignment. So I thought, I'm going to try to write a book. And I had a devotional that I had kept of little ideas. And so I wrote these little 2 or 3 paragraph devotionals, and I cobbled together about 70 of them, little 1-page devotionals. And I put it together in a manuscript and sent it out to 15 different publishers. I got 14 rejections, but the 15th one said yes. That was in 1985. That's not a very good book. I never recommend it. That first one, it's terrible. I don't even own a copy myself, I don't think. But it did open the door to the publishing world for me. And by the time that book was published, I had an idea for a second book. And I think it was a better book by far. And then my assignment in the writing world had become clear. And I came to that church in San Antonio with that part of my job description. I met with the leaders of the church and I said, I think I'm called to write. So I had to create a rhythm of writing at that point. And I learned that if you put a little extra work on these sermons, they can become book chapters. And so I created every sermon series thinking it was a potential book.
In very specific terms, do you write in the mornings? Do you write any time of day, or what's that look like?
Tuesdays is meeting day, okay? And so I'll meet with anybody about anything, schedule permitting, on Tuesday. But I am very jealous about Monday and Wednesday and Thursday mornings, because that's my study time. I'll start around 8 or 8:30 in the morning, and I'll study with a lunch break until mid-afternoon. And when I say study, I'm writing and studying. And I'll do that again on Wednesday, and then I'll do that again on Thursday morning. And I have found that 2.5 days, I can get a good first draft done for the sermon. Now I turn my sermons in several weeks in advance because I share the preaching responsibilities with another pastor. But for many, many years, I was the only pastor. And so my promise to our staff was to have a sermon to them by Thursday afternoon. That's why I made Thursday mornings my goal. Yeah. I think one key, just practical key, that I had the same editor for about 40 books, and she's wonderful, and she's retired now. But she would always challenge me to summarize the entire book in one sentence, and that was a great tool. What is the one promise, the big idea for this book? And then she would hold me to it. We're editing each chapter, saying, now, how does this chapter fulfill that promise you've made, that sentence that you've made about the book? And that was an extremely helpful tool.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and a conversation with Max Lucado about his life and new book, Tame Your Thoughts. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in the episode and a full transcript. We would be most appreciative if you'd go to your favorite podcast app and write up a glowing 5-star review of No Small Endeavor. Those reviews make a difference. They help extend the reach of the beauty, truth, and goodness we are seeking to sow in the world, and we would be most grateful for your help. If you enjoy our episodes on spirituality, then you should check out the Garrison Institute Presents The Common Good. It's the brand new podcast from the Garrison Institute, the leading nonprofit organization exploring the intersection of contemplation and engaged action in the world. Hosted by Garrison Institute co-founder and urban visionary Jonathan F.P. Rose, the series dives into the threads that bind us all, taking you on a journey through the nature of life, the mind, and compassionate action. First, you discover the interdependent nature of life with environmental entrepreneur Paul Hawken and trailblazing plant intelligence researcher Monica Gagliano. Next, you unlock the mysteries of the mind with renowned psychiatrist Dan Siegel. Finally, you experience compassion in action with environmental strategist Conda Mason and others. Listen, reflect, and act for the common good. Follow the Garrison Institute Presents The Common Good on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
You open the Walmart app and boom! The Reebok and Hanes styles that keep your kiddos on their A game delivered in as fast as an hour. That's right, those comfy Hanes Performance Crew socks they love in the app. And the coolest shirts, shorts, hoodies, and leggings from Reebok? Yep, Walmart's got them. They'll feel so focused in their new gear, they won't even notice you freaking out on the sidelines. Shop Reebok and Hanes in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new. Subject to availability, fees, and restrictions apply.
At what point did you start writing children's books?
When I started having kids. And so when I came home every day and we had those 3 small girls, there was kind of a passing of the baton. My wife was so happy to see me home. I've always loved kids, though, and I was excited, so we'd go bike riding or swimming or something, and then we would always have story time. And out of those stories, I started creating, instead of just reading stories, we would make up our own stories. And that was a blast. And I wrote my first children's book out of a very story that I wrote for my kids called Just in Case You Ever Wonder. And I created this little limerick, I guess you'd call it, a little repetitive phrase. Just in case you ever wonder, your mom and dad will always be here. When you get afraid, when you go to school, if you can't go to sleep, just in case you ever wonder. And I would say it to them every night. And it was a nice little phrase. And so one morning I was supposed to go preach, and I turned out to be needed a root canal. I had to call in a substitute, and I had a good friend at our church who was a dentist, and he hurried over and gave me something pretty heavy duty. I don't know what it was, but it knocked the pain out, but it didn't knock me out. And I thought, I'm going to see if I can turn that little phrase into a book. And that book is still out there. It's still doing great, just in case you ever wonder. So that's really how it started.
Was You Are Special? That was another kind of prominent one that you did early on, right?
That is my best-selling book of all time.
Really?
You Are Special.
Yeah.
And it's a story I wrote for my daughters. And it's about a little wooden village called Wemmicksville, and the people are Wemmicks. And what they do all day, every day, is walk around giving each other labels. They stick a star on you if you're good. They stick a dot on you if you're not. And poor little Punchinello had so many dots on him that every time he saw somebody, they'd just give him another dot. And he met one little wooden person who had no dots or stars. Her name was Lucia. And he asked her how it is that she has no stars or dots. And she said, well, every day I go see the maker. I go to Eli. I go meet him, and I let him talk to me. And he said, I want to do that. So off he goes. And when he meets Eli, one of his dots falls to the ground. It's a real simple story, but I think it gains traction in this world in which everybody is comparing and grading and competing with one another. And so it's fun. It's a fun book.
Let me armchair psychologize just a moment. So I hear you share, you've got this 15-year-old experience in which you began to realize your own shame or experience shame. You've got a mother whom you deeply love, and yet at the same time you're realizing that you're having to walk on eggshells to make sure that you're okay. And that in all of those things, there's this sort of formation in you bubbling up where you become the Lucia. You're wanting the people around you to know you're loved, you're okay, there's grace, there's acceptance. How's that fit, Max Lucado, you think?
I think that's a brilliant analysis. I do. I don't think I've ever connected the dots in the way you just did. I do think the message of grace and forgiveness and acceptance by my Maker warms my heart more than anything I've ever discovered, anything in my whole life. And I think that I am compelled to help people understand that they are accepted and beloved, cherished, designed, and built by their Maker. So I think what you're saying is, I wonder how much of our own message comes out of our own wounds. I wonder how much of my proclivity toward alcohol was coming out of the messaging that I had heard, that the subtle messaging that said you're not doing a good job, right? I think that's a very, very fair analysis. Have you ever thought about going into psychotherapy?
In 2020, we have the murder of George Floyd, and then all sorts of demonstrations around Black Lives Matter. And my understanding from the San Antonio report recounts that at one local gathering in San Antonio, if I remember correctly, 3,000 people there.
Yeah.
It reads, quote, prominent local pastor and author Max Lucado got down on his knees Sunday in San Antonio to beg forgiveness for his and his white ancestors' acts of racism and inaction. And then they quote you, I am sorry that I've been silent. I am sorry that my head has been buried in the sand. My brothers and sisters are hurting, and I am sorry. I have made them to feel less than. I did not help. I did not hear. I did not see. I did not understand, end quote. I mean, this seems to be another kind of significant moment where you're coming to terms with the fact that there's potential dangers in saying we're not going to talk about politics. So any commentary on that, of how you see that being important at that moment?
Yeah, 2020, again, right in the middle of the COVID and then the explosion with the George Floyd murders. There were a group of pastors in San Antonio, African-American pastors, who began meeting to pray about the right response. And they sent the invitation out to all pastors to come and pray with them. And only 2 or 3 of us came. I went to that luncheon to try to understand where this wounding came from. And I was struck by the depth of the hurt. Let me illustrate it like this. One pastor in particular turned to me. It was during an open mic time, right? But there are only 3 white guys there and 18 or 19 African-American pastors. And one of them turned to me in that public gathering, and he said, do you have any idea what it's like to be a middle schooler in a classroom and studying American history and opening the history book to see a picture of the back of a slave where the whip has left a spider web of scars. And while the rest of the class says that's part of history, I have to say that's my ancestry. Why did they do that to my ancestors? And that was the moment for me, Lee. And that's why when I prayed that prayer, I said, I think I've had my head in the sand. Never dawned on me that a person might have that visceral reaction to that picture as a middle schooler. And I realized, I think I've spent decades being unaware. We did then host a citywide gathering, a prayer gathering. And I invited that particular, it was during COVID, so it was outdoors, everybody sitting in their cars wearing masks. And we had a platform and we had a speaker system set up. But I invited that pastor and I prayed with him there, and I asked him for forgiveness. Now, many of your listeners might think this is a bit odd, but I believe in spiritual warfare, and I believe that there is an ancestry of hurt that gets passed down from generation to another. And so when I apologized, there's not a time in my life that I've taken a whip to a person, ever. But if I could somehow break that chain spiritually, maybe a demonic presence, by praying and publicly announcing, I'm sorry from my ancestry to your ancestry, I'm so sorry, then I'll do it. I'll do it. Because what that person has inherited and what they're carrying is heavy in their life. And at least I can do is acknowledge and own that my ancestry contributed to your slavery.
So I'm reminded, listening to you tell those stories, I recently interviewed a very prominent social media influencer who does a lot on government. And 2 things come up that I want to get your reaction to. One was that she said at one point, she was talking about how she tries to be nonpartisan but not neutral. She doesn't believe that any one party has all the solutions, but that doesn't mean she must not speak out about various things that either party has to say. And she said at one point that neutrality favors the oppressor, and that by not speaking out about matters, we make space for the oppressor.
Do you agree with that?
I see many, many cases in which that seems to be profoundly true. Do you?
I think that justice is a challenge in any culture, and I think that neutrality is allowing the kind of the default toward injustice to take over. And neutrality does not have to mean anger. It can just be that deep-seated conviction that we have that the world can truly be a better place. And that part of being a good neighbor is listening and understanding and not diminishing. You read the prayer that I prayed that day, and thanks for bringing that up. I haven't thought about this moment in many years, but that phrase, less than, the fellow who shared that story with me about seeing the middle school textbook, and he said, all my life I have been made to feel less than. And this guy, by the way, this guy has 2 master's degrees. This guy flew fighter jets in the Air Force. And so here's a very accomplished African-American leader and who chose later in his life to become a pastor. And so he's accomplished things that I'll never dream of. But even so, he said, I still feel and I live with this sense of less than, which is tragic, heartbreaking. And so praying into that, I felt like was an appropriate thing to do.
Coming up, a short break, followed by a discussion about Max's newest book.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Switch to Shiseido Benefiance Wrinkle Smoothing Eye Cream and discover why people are calling it the best eye cream. A powerhouse formula that targets 5 types of eye area wrinkles. 96% of users saw reduced wrinkles and diminished dark circles after just 7 days. Shop Shiseido Benefiance Wrinkle Smoothing Eye Cream at Sephora and discover how change can happen in the blink of an eye. Consumer tested by 110 women.
Your new book.
Okay.
You got a new book.
Surprise.
Yeah. I was delighted to see this because I think that your book seems to be around what I would call the good news of neuroplasticity. Is that fair?
That is.
Yeah.
That is. That's a great word, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's a great word. What got you into writing and thinking about thinking?
You see the statistics that adolescents are battling anxiety and depression to a degree, unlike, it seems like any other time since we've been measuring this. My book quotes a statistic that says 42% of adolescents would say they live under a pervasive cloud of dread or anxiety. That's terrible, isn't it? 4 out of 10. And 22% have contemplated suicide in the 6 months prior to the survey, which is just tragic. I just happened to be reading that article one day as I was sitting in a fast food place, and in walked about 10 or 12 college-age kids. And I thought about that statistic, 4 out of 10 dealing with anxiety and depression, 2 out of 10 having contemplated suicide. I thought, these kids, look at them. That means that 4 out of 10 of those are really, they're carrying much more than their backpacks. They're carrying a real heaviness. And 2 out of 10 have really battled it to a severe degree. That's what got me interested in this whole topic, Lee. And so I've decided to present a series of messages to our church that would fit under the big umbrella of mental health. And I tried to articulate some tools that people could use. And the result has become this book called Tame Your Thoughts.
What would you see as some of the key takeaways from what you try to describe there?
Yeah. I don't know why it seems to me to be a new idea to many people, and that is you can really manage your thoughts. You really can. as I've communicated or had conversations with people about this particular topic, there is a sense in which when I say, well, just try to practice picky thinking. That's my favorite phrase. And my subtext is just because you have a thought, you don't have to think it. And that strikes people as a bit new, a new idea. You mean I don't have to think this thought? I can interrupt it? The phrase in the Bible is take every thought captive. And yet most people are not acquainted with that language. And so I just call it practice picky thinking. And when you have these thought patterns that come your way, try to interrupt them quickly. Your brain is a bit like the sit room at the White House. It's where you got to protect any outside influence, and so that healthy and good decisions can be made. And so this whole idea of practicing picky thinking is one of my favorite topics.
Yeah. We have discussed this topic with a lot of different guests from a lot of different angles on No Small Endeavor, but it does seem to me that this capacity that we have to observe ourselves thinking is something like a superpower that we just have so little paid attention to. And it's remarkable that I can really begin to say, oh, my mind is giving a lot of attention to X, and then to develop the capacity not to continue to feed energy into the loop around X, and to spin up something else over here.
I think it's a fascinating topic, and I agree. I think we all have a proclivity to a certain type of toxic thought, and identifying what that particular toxic thought is and interrupting it on a regular basis is one of the healthiest things we can do for ourselves.
What's it look like for you when you're trying to interrupt toxic thoughts? What's it actually look like for you? Or how do you do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's say that I take offense at what somebody says about me. Let's say somebody listens to this wonderful program and they send me an angry text because of what I said. But this is very real. I had an article published 3 days ago on Fox News on their website. And then people are allowed to write comments about that article. And the very first one said, "Is this a slow news day?"
Ouch.
And well, dadgummit. What do you have to do? It was kind of a kind article, And then somebody else said, out of all the Christian writers, Lucado is not my favorite. Why did they have to say that? So obviously it doesn't bother me because I've completely forgotten. Here I am still talking about it 3 days later. So criticism, here's a fascinating statistic. 4 out of 5 thoughts, according to the Cleveland Clinic. Number one, we have 70 thoughts a day, and 4 out of 5 of those tend to be critical or negative.
Wait, we have how many?
We have 70,000 a day.
70,000 per day.
70,000 a day. Most of them are random, insignificant. Yeah. It's cold outside. One more to have for dinner. They don't matter much. Of those 70,000, 4 out of 5 tend to be negative or critical.
Yeah, that just feels overwhelming, doesn't it?
Can it be that bad?
Yeah.
Are we the nation of Eeyore? Do you think that's an overstatement?
It certainly. I certainly have had plenty of seasons in my life where I would say, yeah, I can see that being the case for me.
Yeah.
So when you're in that sort of frustration, offense at the tackiness, what do you do with it?
I have gotten better at that. I'm 70 years old now, so I think my skin is a lot thicker. But I do get that just kind of irritated. Oh, why do you have to do that? That kind of thought. But I don't dwell on it. There was a time I would have dwelled on it, but I have come to learn to talk to myself. Talk to my soul. I practice self-talk. And I say, oh, well, who cares? At the end of the day, I did what I was supposed to do. So I'll give myself a little talk. And I feel like I'm pretty good about moving on.
Other particular practices for that practicing the picky thinking, redirecting, how else might you suggest that folks specifically lean into that?
Some time ago, I developed this little tool, and it's certainly not original with me, but the way I say it might come across as unique. I call it UFO. In the U and the F and the O, we're not talking about what happens in Roswell, New Mexico here, but we're talking about an untruth that leads to a false narrative that leads to an overreaction. An untruth leads to a false narrative that leads to an overreaction. One of the most crucial parts of picky thinking is determining what's true. What's true? I may see you looking at me, and I'm thinking, well, Lee doesn't like me today. Well, I don't know if that's true or false, but it's an assumption that I make. It's an untruth. And that leads to a false narrative. I don't think I'm going to hang around Lee anymore because I see this. He has this, when he looks at me, I can just see he doesn't like me. Well, that leads to an overreaction. That means next time I see another person, hey, Lee doesn't like me. It's just a blatant overreaction. As a young pastor, I was always dealing with people's overreactions, right? Their angry outbursts, their addiction to chemicals, their mistreatment of people. Now I've come to see that rather than always deal with behavior, why don't you back it upriver a bit and try to find the belief that's creating that behavior? What's going on? And odds are they have accepted an untruth. One more example of this, and I'll shut up. But I see this a whole lot with people who struggle with materialism, which we all do to one degree or another, right? But if I buy into an untruth that says I am as valuable as I look, as my appearance, well, that's a lie, but it is a truth that many people embrace. Then that untruth will lead to a false narrative that says my goal on earth is to look as good as I can, right? So I'm going to buy clothing, I'm going to do things to my body to make it bigger or smaller, whatever I need to do to be acceptable. That will lead then to the overreaction of maybe going into debt, charging too much with my credit card, doing things to my body that hurt my body, obsessing myself with particular fashions. And so rather than deal just with that overreaction, let's go back to the very beginning and find what is the untruth that you're listening to. And in this case, we could change that untruth into a truth. You're loved by God. You're cherished by God. The right narrative for your life is no matter how I appear, I still matter. And that can lead to a healthy reaction and a healthier outlook on life. UFO.
Yeah. UFO.
Clever, huh?
Yeah. Pinky thinking, identify the UFOs.
Yeah.
There's one more in the toolkit.
What's that one's called uproot and replant.
Okay.
I'm all about metaphors, right?
Yes.
So I tell the story in the book about at the age of 12, my dad put me in charge of the lawn one summer. Too young to get a job, but I could be in charge of cutting the grass. But we had grass burrs everywhere. Grass burrs. That's what we call them in West Texas, stickers.
Oh, yeah.
They grow on a stalk, and you can literally tomahawk people with them because they're about 6 inches tall, and they're a bunch of cluster of stickers.
Wicked little weeds.
Yeah. You never want to fall into a patch of grass burrs when you're playing baseball. And so Dad wanted me to get rid of them. And so I got the lawnmower and I cut them down. And then they were back a week later. And he realized, I don't think I've taught you, son, how to do this. And so he got a garden spade and got me a garden spade. And out we went, spent the better part of a Saturday digging them out one by one. I think our minds are a bit like that lawn. And we get these stickers that grow up. And we have to get this serious about extracting them. So I call that uproot. Now, that's not novel. I mean, there's so many different lines of thought to talk about emptying your mind. I think more unique to the Christian approach would be that we really try to practice replanting. Instead of just emptying our mind and being void of thought, we want to extract the negative thought, but replace it with truth. And here's where scriptures are really helpful. As we embrace Scripture as God's Word to help us, I can extract that thought that says I'm not worth anything, and I can replant, and I can meditate on particular scriptures that might say nothing can separate us from the love of God. And just say that. It becomes my mantra over and over all day long. And so the healthy thinker is constantly saying, I'm not going to think that because that's going to lead to an overreaction. I'm going to uproot that, and I'm going to replant with a particular passage or teaching or concept that will help me.
Any last closing encouragement for, let's imagine somebody is thinking, yeah, I've got that toxic thinking. Any last bit of encouragement of how they might take a first step forward?
Well, I do think the way our brains are made, we use that word neuroplasticity, it just tells us that our brains are not chunks of concrete, but they're more like malleable putty that can really change. They truly can change. Neuroscience is telling us that when a person determines that they are going to be a better thinker, within a matter of 10 minutes, the brain is already reshaping, and that new habit, they call them ruts, those furrows in our brain through which the synapses pass, those are being formed. And so I find that so encouraging.
Yeah.
I don't have to have the same outlet. I talked about my wife and her battle with depression. It took several months, and she still has to keep an eye out, but she knows the signs. She can tell when she's about to slide into a dark time. And so she takes initiative. She watches out. She'll get better rest. She'll reach out to some friends. What she's doing, she's protecting her mind, and she knows her proclivity. I know my proclivities, and there's probably a few I haven't confessed yet. But I'm very encouraged, and I'm very confident. I'll close with this. Very confident to tell people, you don't have to be the same person tomorrow that you are today. You don't have to be. And this is a promise that comes from the Bible. But even if you disregard the Bible, if you have a whole different worldview, don't give up on yourself. Just keep believing that good can happen, and I believe it will.
Been talking to best-selling author, Pastor Max Lucado, about his newest book, Tame Your Thoughts, as well as his life and his work in the world. Max, thank you so much for your generosity with your time today, and we're very grateful.
It's my honor. And again, terrific job.
Thank you very much. Here's a closing take on our interview with Max Lucado. One matter I would have loved to discuss further, had opportunity allowed, related to Max's policy not to talk about American politics publicly, given his prioritization of Christian proclamation. As noted in the interview, Max has set aside this policy at several crucial moments in his career. The impact American evangelicals have had upon American political institutions has been widely discussed. Given this reality, the fact that one of the most prominent of evangelicals has a rule to keep silence about American politics is a matter of great social interest and political import, and his decision on several occasions to break that rule because of his public prominence is thus also of great social and political import. Had we had more time to discuss, these are some of the questions I would have liked to have explored. When ought one speak, and when ought one stay quiet on some matter of justice or social import? How does one best make that decision? And if the decision is to speak, then in what manner and in what context? If you're a regular listener to No Small Endeavor, you know that doing justice is one of the 4 so-called cardinal virtues. So is prudence. There are some who claim, convincingly so to me, that there is no virtue done virtuously if not done with prudence. So, consequences, circumstances, and possible outcomes must all be considered, and more. But then there's a further possible danger, that prudence might become a rationalization for one's own self-interest, one's own self-protection, which is why prudence also requires us to judge when we must act quickly, because sometimes to act or speak too slowly is to facilitate harm. I would have loved to have that opportunity to explore more the way in which Max has navigated all of those questions and thought about such judgments. One helpful practice toward a good life I'd like to note: Max's career, his life, seems oriented, as I proffered in the interview, around his own need for, his own desire to extend grace, love, and acceptance. He shared how he carries about with him old wounds not yet fully healed, old wounds that no measure of celebrity or book sales or social approval will ever simply eradicate. And I suspect he is in this way no different than most of us with our wounds and our bruises. And there is much important inner work we can do to learn to identify the untrue narratives we tell ourselves, to uproot the overreactions we play out of those false narratives, and to form habits of thinking that mitigate the new pain we might cause from our old wounds. But today, in closing, I'd like to suggest that we simply pay attention to this: the fact that so many of us are carrying around our wounds and bruises. And one choice we can each make is whether we will compound the old inner burdens our neighbor may be bearing, or whether we will become a vessel of grace and kindness to one another. That's a small, but not so small closing take on today's episode. Peace to you, my friend. You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with pastor and New York Times bestselling author Max Lucado about his new book, Tame Your Thoughts. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.
Listen. That's the sound of the fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. The sound of captivating electric performance, dynamic drive, and the quiet confidence of ultra-smooth handling. The elevated interior reminds you this is more than an EV. This is electric performance redefined. The fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron.